I never imagined my life would be changed by a knock on the door. Yet that evening, did my father go fishing every weekend? It began as a side gig for him after he married Jessica, my stepmother, and me. We weren't close, but we didn't despise one another. New life was frequently left at home with her. Jessica always knew how to act like the kind of woman that men would want to be around, find calm, and ladies would either be envious of or cautious of that evening. The house was oddly silent, with only the wind blowing and no TV or kitchen water. I sat in my room, listening to the wall clock ticking away through the windows, having just completed clearing the stack of. I was going to switch on YouTube to view a video to help me forget about the presentation materials, when there was agently tap on the door, as though the knocker wasn't sure whether to do so, and when I glanced around, nobody was there. But then someone said, "Lucas, are you?" My stepmother, Jessica, was asleep when I opened the door. She was standing there with her hair in her hair, down in a flimsy robe, her eyes slightly red as though she had been sobbing. "Are you okay?" I said, and she grinned broadly. "I can't sleep, so please let me sit with you." I nodded for a long, feeling a little ashamed, and then she entered and took a seat in the window chair. Her face was illuminated by a nightlight which produced an odd, gentle but not before. I would sit with my mother and eat any time I couldn't sleep. Cake was talking about various topics when she looked out the window, and now I was alone. I was speechless and unsure of how to respond. She was obviously depressed, but in the midst of the tension in my room that night was caused by a lovely but depressed woman. The air felt oppressive, Lucas. So she turned to stare at. "What are your thoughts on me?" I was a little taken aback. I shook, my head a little perplexed. "But no. I'm not afraid of you, although it sounds risky, approachable." Jessica smiled. Light as air. Nobody dared to say it, so she got up and approached, placing her hand on my. "I apologize if I'm making you uncomfortable, but I'm just caressing your shoulder softly and not crushing it. It's been. Do you understand?" That I nodded. "Not because I haven't had anyone to chat to?" Realizing this, she left the room a few minutes later without saying hello or good night. It's hard to describe, but I had trouble sleeping the entire night, and woke up the following morning. Jessica appeared to have changed, as she was happily preparing breakfast as usual and made no mention of last night, which I didn't dare inquire, but that hazy gesture on the shoulder remained in my recollection. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it reverberated in my mind, like a song. When my father left for his next fishing trip a few days later, Jessica showed up at my door once more, this time without knocking. "Do you like movies?" she asked after knocking again, opening the door and entering. "Yes. What's wrong?" I asked, looking up from my computer. "I just downloaded an old one." I paused for a moment. "Not very famous, but very good. Want to watch it together?" And then concurred that the film was melancholy, lovely, and eerie, but I can't remember the movie. But Jessica's hand on my thigh at a quiet moment. I have no idea what's going on, but it's just sitting there, caressing, and acting like it's been there the entire time. Does she truly want something, or is she just testing me? What am I at the end of the film? Jessica just got up, gathered her things, and turned to face me without saying anything. "I appreciate you sitting with me. Sometimes it's enough to have someone by my side." Then she departed, leaving me wondering if I had dreamed or not. I glanced at the ceiling that night before falling asleep slowly and suddenly having a dream. When Jessica appeared, she was seated on the window chair and, instead of crying, she grinned in an odd way. Odd things that only leak drips and never go overboard with a big noise. Slowly soak into us, much way rainwater does through a wall until we realize it's too late after that movie night with Jessica, and we're saturated. No longer maintained her distance, frequently showing up under false pretenses to inquire if I asked for assistance drawing the curtains and adjusting the TV remote since I wanted to eat. The things she was able to do, but she kept calling my doorbell to inquire, and each time I opened the door because I wanted to hear her shout my name, not because I was being courteous. Name Lucas. She sounded like someone with a gentle, drawn-out voice that was nearly a whisper. Reminiscing about a time in the past when there was no name and mild rain fell all day, was gray, and I was just going to go to my room when Jessica knocked on the door. "Do you want to play a game?" she asked, holding a small metal box in her palm. I stared. She smiled and said, "I'm shocked. Game? Truth or dare? But the adult version." Not the agreed. But I wasn't sure why. It was sexy. More like I was running, away from my sanity. Jessica gave me a metal box as we sat in the dimly lit living room, each of us sipping a glass of red wine. There were folded bits of paper within, and each one presented a difficulty for her. The guidelines are straightforward. If you select truth, you must respond. To be honest, I'll give you a challenge if you choose to dare. Take turns, please. I swallowed something while skipping, and my heart began to race like something I couldn't control was going to occur. So I decided to answer the truth question first. Have you ever really loved someone? I grinned somewhat ashamedly, and then nodded. Yes, once, but never ventured to ask, why? Because that individual is not a member of... Jessica gave me a longer than normal look before taking out a piece of paper. She chose the word dare, so I had to think for a challenge, but I was at a loss for words, so I finally blurted out, "Dare I tell you a secret?" She looked up, her eyes sinking like the surface of a pit that no one had ever known. At the age of 18, I lived with a man after a lengthy period of silence. He was my teacher and was 16 years older than me. I mistakenly believed it to be love, but I sat motionless while he filled the vacuum in my marriage with this simple item. Jessica took a sip of wine and then glanced back at me, as if everything around me had frozen. I then believed that people would keep me if I was good enough, obedient enough, and polite enough. But it turns out that someone merely like a product that is foldable while not in use. The game finished after a few rounds with no winners or losers, but as Jessica whispered, behind me as I got up to clear my glasses, "Thank you, Lucas, it's been a long time." I just nodded since I wasn't sure how to react the first time I was the one being questioned, rather than the one being watched. I couldn't sleep that night because Jessica's story kept coming back to me like on the slow-motion video. I felt sad, for her, but I also wanted to be. I was unaware that I was straying from the edge, and Jessica did nothing to stop her from reliving her past traumas. 3 days after the truth or dare evening, Jessica stopped avoiding me. "Please bring me back," familiar pounding on the door. No more sweet eyes every morning. She disappeared inside this very house. I was confused. I felt like I had done something wrong, but I wasn't sure what she told me about the past, and perhaps, I ought to have given her a hug, or at least held her hand that day, but I remained silent. When my father returned home late on Friday afternoon for a conference, would it be too much? Jessica had been home. She hadn't left her room since lunchtime, but I passed it and was ready to knock. But as her voice spoke, not softly, but loudly, I hesitated, my palm hovering in front of the door. I was shocked to hear her enter. Did she realize I was there? The door opened, and I entered the lavender-scented room that was illuminated by Jessica was resting on her side on the bed with her hair a little unkempt under the desk lamp. I was about to knock because her eyes were a touch red. "But you..." She sat up and pulled the blanket to her chest, saying, "Don't have to do that anymore." I was at a loss for words. Was still the same silky, ash-gray nightgown that Lucas occasionally wears, are worn out by the things they have to pretend not to feel, not by their bodies. I glanced at her, and Jessica waved me over, pointing to the sentence, and I realized it wasn't just for her. I sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a safe distance away, and she gazed at me for a while before saying quietly, "I used to think if one day I disappeared, would anyone miss me?" Two gulped. My voice was quiet but unwavering, and Jessica grinned. We're shining with a stronger sense of loneliness rather than tears. "Lucas, maybe you're better than I imagined." She touched my hand gently without snugly enough for me to sense the invitation, the warmth and the heartbeat. I should have backed off, but instead I squeezed and she cocked her head, forehead resting on my shoulder, and we sat like that for a while without anyone saying anything else. When I got up to leave, Jessica pulled me back, revealing a house too silent to be secure, with lonely people reclining against one another. "Keep talking softly for just 10 minutes. I can't fall asleep." I paused, then moved closer this time, and she put her head on my lap like though, even if it was a harmless gesture, My heart didn't believe it. Thus 10 minutes went by. When 15 minutes had passed and nobody had gone to sleep or closed their eyes, I touched her hair. Touched it softly out of instinct rather than purpose or calculation. She didn't say anything, and neither did I, but that night I had a dream about a door in a jar, tried to open it further, but it was pulled back by another hand. I just heard the question and couldn't see the other person's face. Are you certain you'll be able to return if you go through the door from behind? It was just me and the sound of the wind outside the window as I woke up in the dark. The following morning, after Jessica had returned to her room, I discovered a little piece of paper beneath my door, scribbled in blue. Certain things should only be done with feelings, because if we go any farther, Jay. I took the paper and read it over, since we might lose the last valuable item. And again, then I put it in the drawer without daring to respond. What prompted her to write that? But I felt both relieved and disappointed. We were on the verge of falling in love. But sometimes the closest thing is the farthest separation between two individuals. It was a cool fall evening and it wasn't raining, yet Jessica said goodbye to my father, who was traveling for a lengthier than typical 3-day work trip. Nobody gave me a look as she walked to the car with her typical kind smile and a quick hug. Nobody inquired, and everything seemed so typical, even phony, before the door closed. When the car started, the room was silent, like water, and I didn't leave. Till my mind was heavy and my stomach was hungry at about 1000 p.m., when I went down to the Jessica was standing in front of the window in the kitchen, and I could see the yellow light bouncing from her nose bridge and cheekbones. She had no makeup on and was dressed in a long black silk robe. She turned around, grinning, and it was so lovely that it made my heart skip a beat. Angetta. I nodded, stunned, and she gestured to the table where I had prepared cheese. Are you hungry? I'm not sure if you like it, but when I sat down, I thought this scene was, she didn't eat as planned. Instead, I poured her wine, which was darker than usual, ate and drank slowly. We didn't talk much, but our gazes kept locking. When I was done, she got up and held a second glass of wine. Would you like to watch a movie with me? Maybe she stopped and sat for a bit, and I got up and nodded, but she didn't guide me to the main room. She proceeded directly to her chamber, but I hesitated. Upon reflection, that's all right. I trust you. That was just a single sentence, but it made all my. The space had the same lavender scent and golden lighting as before. Defenses collapsed, but tonight I sat down in the same spot in the window-facing chair. But something different. Jessica sat near the bed with her head turned aside, seemingly thinking about something. Lucas, indeed, have you ever considered who we could be outside of the parts we play? I don't know what I said honestly, but I stopped because my heart was racing. Yet I'm aware that I want to keep you safe. She grinned sadly, but nobody had to defend someone like you, Lucas. You're not the one in need of rescue. Then she got up and moved really close to me, could sense her hair's delicate scent. Not perfume, but the smell of human skin. With no way back, she lifted her palm and put it on my chest without applying any pressure. It smelled like a cushion and like a night. I touched her hand without intending to, and I'm not sure why. No calculation, and she asked, "Can I?" As we stood there like two souls attempting to close their eyes and cross the threshold. Give me a hug once. I nodded, and we hugged for a very long time without anyone else. Shouted something else, but just as I was ready to back off, she stopped me with her hands, breath, and eyes. And I can't recall what I didn't stop this time. Occurred next. Just the sensation of being drawn into a vortex, sinking deeper and deeper the more I resisted, was hot, hazy, and had a fleshy fragrance. We said nothing. It was just. She lay next to me as everything cooled down, our eyes never leaving each other as we breathed and touched skin to skin. The nightlight produced a cozy glow as her head rested on my chest. She spoke quietly, almost like a silent picture frame all around us. I clasped my hands silently, wondering if this would be the last time you regret it. Despite feeling cold, I replied, "No, I only regret not coming sooner." She didn't respond, but I could feel her smooth breathing, which seemed like laughing and approval. I was unconscious, but before I closed my eyes, I noticed a tiny flashing, a dim red light in the room's corner, possibly from a camera or flashlight. The faint sound of my alarm clock blaring through the partially closed door roused me up at about 6 in the morning. Jessica was removed. The sheets were still warm and crumpled, but there were no other signs, as if I put my top back on after having a dream last night and left her room, head still spinning from what felt like what had just transpired, or was happening. It was odd to feel like I was being watched. As I walked back to my room and looked across the kitchen light was still on in the living room, and the glass of wine from yesterday was still half full when I touched it. And it was cold, indicating that she had either been up for a while or wasn't asleep. As I turned to go, the flickering light reappeared in the room's corner between the Bluetooth. There was a tiny red dot in the speaker and the phony flower vase. But I wasn't error. I squatted down and approached, and for the first time, I could clearly see a small red flashing camera that you can get online that is hidden in the speaker feint. I retreated a step like though I had just been struck in the face. I went back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed to try to put together what had happened when she had stated, "Stay for." She only spoke for 10 minutes, but she always picked a moment when my father wasn't around to give her a sympathetic ear. And now Jessica barely knew what she was doing on camera, step by step, appeared during the day. I proceeded to the kitchen, but didn't see her. I then walked to the living room, which was spotless and even empty. She returned in the evening while I was seated by the window, holding a paper bag from the bakery, grinned a little and said, "Want to buy the macaroons? You like?" I nodded without glancing at her. But I sensed a shift. The warmth had vanished, and in its place was a Jessica didn't invite me over for dinner that night, and I was terrified and alert like someone who had just completed a role. I couldn't sleep at 2 a.m., but she didn't knock on the door and left me alone. Entered the hallway. The door crack wasn't there, but her light wasn't. I stood there for quite a minute, feeling as though it was purposefully left open. It seemed like someone was waiting for me to fall into the trap behind that door. I simply left a little piece of paper tucked inside the door's crack instead. When I woke up the following day, there was no reaction. So was last night real or a test? I received the piece of paper back, folded in 4, and set it neatly on my room's desk. I opened it and read one line in. "You responded with familiar blue ink, didn't you?" I shuddered at that. I began avoiding Jessica, avoiding every glance and any indication that I was in contact with her. I'm not sure what went wrong, but I did know that I was no longer in charge of this. Story. My father came home early the next weekend, with new fishing equipment and a cheerful disposition. However, he scowled when he spotted me. "You seem really thin, don't you?" I was ready to snooze after eating healthily at home when Jessica came out and interrupted. "He is, but lately he has been a little grumpy and has been staying up late." Her voice was as light as cotton, but it seemed like he was hiding something by not sleeping. Landed like a stone on my breast, and my father gazed at me for a while without. As I was doing the dishes that evening, I noticed my father say something on the phone and then turned to face me. I suppose Jessica whispered something behind my back, and I wanted to. After Jessica finished eating, she screamed and wanted to vanish. After pouring my dad another glass of wine, he grinned at me. Since everyone has cameras these days, perhaps we should be extra watchful of what occurs in the house. My father laughed when I nearly spilled my drink, assuming it was a joke. But Ty took the camera out of my room that night because I knew it was a quiet reminder. Had no idea that there was an outdated electrical outlet concealed beneath the drapes. I don't know if it was a fear or just batteries and a wire led outside. One thing was that I was being filmed, and Jessica was in charge of the performance. 3 days after our most recent dinner, I got a "you believe I don't have any friends at school" based on a text message from an unknown number. Well done. You're a stepmother. I stood motionless in the dormitory corridor, my hands trembling like my heart was racing as I saw a video file of someone who had malaria attached, but I didn't need it and didn't open it. An hour later, he was summoned by the academic supervisor to the office. 2 lecturers were seated in a chilly, white-lit room. Nobody asked or smiled across from me, so we need to make some clarifications. The speech of the vice principal struck like a sledgehammer since it has impacted the schools and the learning setting. I simply sat there without disputing or denying it. Although the film didn't show my face, it did depict the circumstances, my voice, and showed me that nobody questioned why a camera was there or who was shooting. Asked me if I knew what the law said about you doing that to your family. Knowing how old you are, I was unable to express everything that came out. When I returned to my room, the suspension email was waiting for me, but I was hooked and dripping blood. Fortunately, when I contacted my dad, the phone rang 6 times before he answered. Is that correct? Greetings, no questions. Just a stern, chilly statement. That I wished to. He knew I heard a sigh, but my throat was dry, so I said, "You're being set up." At 10 p.m., I stood in front of the house and let out a long, oppressive sigh before heading home. Jessica opened the door with a gaze that showed no surprise, wrath, or anything else. Struck me as though I were a non-existent person. And he was, in his office. My father was seated at the table, and her speech sounded almost like she was reading a screenplay. His eyes were crimson, possibly from tears, and he had light on his hands on a file. Anger. Please sit down. I opened and asked if you had anything to say. I didn't know the camera, so all that came out of my mouth was a faint whisper. After a brief period of silence, he inquired, "When did it begin?" I didn't, Jessica continued. You were the one who answered, that it couldn't be. And he nodded slowly. Started it because she didn't want it to go on. But she was intimidated. That's correct? I leaped to my feet and yelled, "What did she say?" He raised his hand, sat down, and don't fuss. I stared at him, my throat trembling all over. She's not like you believe you don't comprehend, he chuckled, and my heart was exploding. I walked out. But you know, people always say that when they have no way back. I ran with the wind in my face, and a question circling in my mind, without turning around or crying. The following morning, I packed everything and departed, wondering why you had done that to me. My father and Jessica didn't see me depart. Only the stray dog from the neighbor did. Came, bit my pants, and fled without anyone stopping me. I had no idea where all I knew was that I had just been expelled from my own life. So I stayed at and my phone rang non-stop from my old friend's place, which was a little room under a tin roof, sweltering, and filled with the sound of a fan. The texts from unidentified numbers were filled with taunts, ridicule, and stalking. Nobody inquired about my feelings or what actually transpired. There was just one phrase that you heard repeatedly from strangers to acquaintances, that your stepmother was ill. But they were unaware that I was laying in the dark every night and asking myself the same question. I didn't call my dad, and he didn't search for me, but I was staring at the ceiling like I was trying to find a crack to fall through. While purchasing instant noodles on a Saturday afternoon at the grocery store close to my dorm, I noticed Jessica wearing a weird man was standing next to her, dressed like a model from the weekend newspaper in a white shirt, long pants, and sunglasses. They chuckled at his hand as he pushed a cart full of upscale food while sporting gray hair. I stood motionless at the end of the counter, resting on her back in an intimate position. Due to jealousy, but also because she realized she had nothing left, not received criticism, dismissed, or buried on the internet at all. I should have turned away when the pain hit me, but instead I took a step back. Jessica turned her head and gazed at me, her eyes unsurprised. Just a courteous smile that belies apathy. "Oh, Lucas, are you okay?" In an attempt to control my rage, I balled my fists and said, Why? What you know I didn't. You know you're the one, so get started." "You should use caution while words," she broke off, but even so, there are still some things that evidence is merely conjecture. And if there is evidence, then they started acting silly. I looked at her without blinking, and the man next to her started to get irritated. Jessica cocked her head, grin as though speaking to a child. "And what do you think I did? I set you up to be seduced. Are you certain you didn't relish every second we spent together? Lucas, you're a participant, not a victim." I wanted to clarify that she courted it to demonstrate her expertise, but I was also aware that if I opened my mouth, I'd be the one to lose control. And she did just that. She moved closer than I had anticipated, talking loudly enough for me to hear. Don't be. You should learn how to survive being dragged underwater, because I am aware of the regulations." She then gracefully and gently moved away, as if she had never been in my. That evening, I got an anonymous text message about an old tape. "He may betray me, but I will make amends," Jessica stated in a deeper, more irate tone. "He understands what it's like to lose everything, including his cherished son." I repeatedly listened to that section whenever my heart ached a little. Additionally, my mother abandoned me like a piece of my father after he had an affair. Jessica never loved me, and no one wanted to keep the bags. She used me as a pawn to destroy the man who had wronged her. Didn't know who sent the tape. It might have been her ex, or it might have been a forgotten phone. But even if I pulled out this tape, I knew I wouldn't be able to clear my identity, since people only believe what they are told, and not the truth. As they can see on the screen, I spent the entire night lying on the tile floor without turning on the lights, eating or sleeping. Dark. I simply kept saying the same thing over and over again. It's true. True. But the more I say it, the more unsure I get. I'm not sure who I am. I left the city a week later, not in the sight of others anymore. Nobody talked to me at school anymore, either voluntarily or out of survival instinct. The teacher who had said I had writing potential now merely looked at me like I was a stain on a wall, and my friends shunned me. I had a ton of anonymous comments and defamatory collages in my inbox, white sheet, and modified videos that circulated on student forums. With some individuals even covertly after filming me strolling down the street, the school put the caption, "Stepmother is public property" underneath. Formally issued an indefinite suspension with no ethical justification. But they didn't have to because it had a significant impact on the academic community's safety and reputation. Look into it. They only needed to tidy up, and I was garbage, so I returned to my. For some time, my mother's hometown was a small town where few people were aware of the controversy, or, if they were, didn't care. Performed a variety of odd jobs to earn a livelihood, such as cleaning the warehouse and assisting in the kitchen with cable installation. Nobody cared if I wrote a flawless essay, or if I wanted to work as an investigator when they asked me what college I attended. I slept on a folding chair beside the window at night while the monsoon blew. Reporter. I frequently woke up around 3 in the morning via the crevices in the wooden wall, not because of dreams, but more because I felt empty, as though the Lucas side of me had departed my body, leaving behind only a nameless, hollow shadow. And occasionally, Tsakin considered telling someone the entire tale. But I decided against it because I no longer thought that anyone would believe me. Since, at times, I wasn't brave enough to think I was totally innocent. So I decided to stay and stroked, and held her hand. I fell in love with her, but I also paid a price because I played a game without. The last time I heard about Jessica, an old friend of my father's told me that she is the house's owner has since left, and I've heard that your elderly father sold his stake and relocated overseas. I grinned when the movie ended, and I had to move in with a new individual. The film only changed scenes, but for me, I was still the main character. One afternoon, after the lights were off, I happened to be the only person in the theater sitting there. I was browsing the internet on my old phone when I noticed Jessica at a charity event, standing in the center of the platform with a microphone and a white dress, discussing the importance of healing and admiration for the modern family below, and a poster with the. I didn't feel furious when I read about healing from trauma and the path of a mother and wife. Every morning when I got up early, I felt emptiness instead of hurt. Jogging through the misty streets, I occasionally saw the first rays of the day peeking through the wet foliage. I spend hours sitting by the local pond, listening to the cicadas calling to their mates and watching the fish splash. I attempt to feed my mind with fresh sounds and pictures, such as folks burning incense to ward off ghosts, but certain stains are not intended to be removed by washing. Instead, they are supposed to live with, "I hadn't gone back to school," or "searched for a job elsewhere a year after the tragedy." Degree was hanging there like a shabby shirt in a suitcase that wasn't clean enough to wear, but wasn't horrible enough to toss away. Once more, I continued typing a few lines rather than articles each time I opened my laptop. Novels that consist of few paragraphs, a few fictitious sentences, and occasionally letters. To know I discovered a folded newspaper inside the town library one day, while looking through some old books. Page included a picture of Jessica, who is currently the featured speaker at the Women with the Power to Overcome panel, where she was surrounded by a youthful professional woman with confident eyes, well-curled hair, and a beige dress unwrinkled. I spent a lot of time staring at the picture without actually reading the article, then carefully folded it and hid it between my books and the bottom of the shelf, notebook, and an old map. The following day, I got a call from an unknown number, with a familiar yet horror male voice. "Lucas, I recognized my grandfather's voice from my father's side. He said after everything was finished, he learned too late that my father had moved to France with a new wife, and didn't bring me up. But he claimed to still have my childhood photos. Despite knowing that I would eventually leave the family he invited. Me too," I continued to call Dad in a clear, round voice. And I concurred. Later that day, we sat beneath the ancient bougainvillea trellis, each with he shared tales from the past while enjoying a piece of dry cake and a cup of ginger tea, about how my father left school to follow a lady, came back, and then went again. I just listened without asking. "Lucas, you are aware that certain people are born to live without repercussions. They commit crimes and then go straight. The others will have to spend the rest of their lives cleaning up the mess. But the others truly deserve to live." His eyes were lifeless, yet not weak. Perhaps I was more like him than I realized when I returned to my room that evening, opened my laptop, and began composing. I wasn't writing about my father or Jessica, and for the first time in months, my words didn't falter. I was writing about a boy named L, who used to believe he was the main character, but ended up being only a remark in someone else's scheme and lived to tell the tale, not to win. A few weeks later, I ran into a friend. So Hong was a student from high school who used to be so old that I nearly forgot her name. She knew me from the little coffee shop in town where I sat every morning to write, and she wanted to study literature with me. We spoke for a while before she asked if I still wrote. I replied that I did, and she gave me a gentle smile. And honestly, "So you retain a piece of yourself, which is fantastic." Made me want to cry because, for a long time, I believed that I had nothing left to cling to. Considering returning to school, to start over with a clearer head, rather than to restore my reputation. Perhaps I might work harder if I attended a smaller school. But this time, I would go without having somebody grab my hand and shove me in or out. Jessica is most likely still alive now, though she might not recall my name. I'm no longer angry, not really, because I found someone else to trust and push me over the edge. More importantly, even though I'm not complete or clean, I still have myself. After the storm passed, I reconnected with Jessica at a coffee shop on the late winter afternoon. I had traveled to the town's outskirts to conduct research for a piece on memory and the function of forgiveness. She sat with the sun softly slanting through her in the shop's deep corner near the window. She was still seated in the same position with hair that had a few silver strands in it. Legs crossed elegantly, back straight, hands turning a book's pages gently and deliberate. And I wasn't sure if I was staring at a woman at that point, who had destroyed my life, or a persistent ghost from the past. She looked up and spotted me, but I could tell she wasn't smiling or opening her mouth. Recognized me. The same piercing, silent glance that didn't reveal more than I was going to turn away when she said the word Lucas, but it was just enough to make me stop. I approached her desk and stood there, not expecting to see you again. She closed the book and tipped her head. "The article you wrote about sin and time has been shared a lot. The final line, 'No one suffers alone, but each person chooses how to suffer,' is excellent." I sat down without, "You read it all more than once," she continued, looking at him and inviting him without waiting. "You write with pain, and genuine pain always has significance in and of itself. There was no longer any hatred, but something in my heart felt like barbed wire coiling. Why I asked the old question is still upsetting, yet I just want to know what I was actually in, and I don't need you to deny it this time." Jessica gazed at me for a while before placing her hands on the table clutched together as though you were the only one thinking about. "Has anyone ever seen me when I wasn't acting?" I scowled, and it made me shiver. "Yet you still recorded it." I believed I could control it, so I released it while it was still lying. She disrupted everything. including my feelings. But you didn't frighten me. Because you actually attacked me, Jessica, and I was rendered speechless. Continuing, I truly intended to exact revenge on your father for his betrayal back then. Stress abandoned me when I needed me, which led to the loss of my first kid. Him most, and I reasoned that I would feel relieved if I took away what he valued most. My throat felt like a boulder had been lodged in it, as I gazed at her without blinking. I knew you weren't someone to take, though. The only person who didn't try to define me, control me, or possess me was you. Could have stopped, but I chose not to. And when things finally got out of control, I didn't know who to save, so I kept quiet and nobody talked, touched anyone. There was simply the sound of spoons striking glasses and gentle jazz music coming from the ceiling speakers. I used to believe that I was being controlled when I spoke from a different table. Low. But afterwards I questioned whether I would say no if I could go back to that night. Jessica giggled quietly, almost without saying anything. I would just stare. The woman who had destroyed my youth was sitting there looking at me a little longer before I entered. No longer attractive, no longer a character, but a weak, flawed human who was more nude than Jessica's hands were shaking, but not from the cold, as she placed the cup on the table. However, she never expressed sorrow for it. Not aloud, not in tears. Her eyes avoided the light, her fingers avoided it, and her breathing was short. Even though the ring wasn't there. Twisting it, "Do you want me to, I'm sorry?" she questioned. I shook my head, saying, "No. Because if I feel sorry for something better, I'm the weaker one. And if nothing changes, it's just another part," she said, nodding as though she had anticipated it. "You're correct, and I apologize, but I recall a lengthy period of stillness that, after all, did you ever love me?" I asked her as she got up before I left the table. Glanced up at her eyes, which were illuminated by the window and had once caused me to get lost, now filled with the fatigue of someone who has taken on too much. Yes. If love means you perceive the other person as better than you initially believed, but if no, I couldn't love you properly if love is about wanting that person to be free. I nodded, asked no more questions, and walked out of the store. I pulled up my scarf as the wind whipped into my collar on this soggy winter afternoon. Not to protect me from the cold, but to hide the tears that were distorting my vision. A recollection that had just been written down, but I paused on the way back, past a tiny bookshop and purchased a brown leather notepad with an antique snap lock. I intend to put everything in writing, not to share with anyone but to serve as a reminder. Years later, someone questioned, "Me, I survived this, and I'm still me. Does that haunt you?" I asked after a while of staring at them before responding. Remarked, "I don't know how Jessica lived after that, but it lifted me up and didn't haunt me. That perhaps she married, perhaps she changed for the better, or perhaps she never thought of me once more. But I was certain that she no longer has the authority, to she had been the storm, and I was the little house that didn't let her define my story. I've learnt to close properly now, not slam, not lock. Thank you for listening to me tell you this story through to the very end. If you're still sitting there, I want to saying thank you, slowly and clearly, comes from the bottom of my heart. I am aware that the most valuable item an adult can ever exchange is time. And if you have listened to a story that is partially unclear, partially painful, and even uncomfortable, but it's a gift to me. Thus I don't share this tale to get forgiveness, or I say this not to condemn somebody because certain things are unavoidable. The heart for all time, particularly when they start talking in the late afternoon hours, when anyone with I know many of you who have lived a long life, and that's when memories tend to turn. People who have been betrayed and understand the need of remaining silent to protect themselves or others won't listen to. This story makes sense, but it also evokes feelings from some of your earlier experiences, like, all stories, this one may have never been told to anyone. Right or wrong, it's only a question mark in the lengthy book of life. A lost existence. And again, thank you. Sometimes it's enough to have someone open it up. People who listen with hearts warm enough to hear and open enough to comprehend wishes rather than with their ears, pleasant days. And if there are recollections that cannot be identified, know that they can still be subtly recorded. The everyday surprise stories are like a letter issued to the quiet squad.